Well, thank you so much, Will, for being with us today. I've got Will Wiseman. He's the co-founder and CEO of Climatize. And get this, Jesse. Do you remember there was a company called Wonder Capital a few years ago?
Yes.
And it'll let you kind of invest in solar.
But only if you were rich.
Exactly. We got a lot of emails from people who are like, I'm not that rich, dude. So how do I do it? And I was like, sorry. Well, Will, you let pretty much anyone do it. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Hey, thank you guys for having me. And yeah, it's really exciting to be here with you both and to get to share a little bit about Climatize, where you can invest in solar projects with as little as $10.
Okay, wait. How does that work, though? I mean, how is that possible?
So first of all, I'm gonna give Climatize $10, and then I'm gonna somehow be investing in solar projects. How am I doing that?
Yeah, so with Climatize, it's a little bit like you are the bank. So we're actually sourcing projects through our network of renewable energy developers and through a partnership with the Department of Energy. And from that, we do our due diligence process on them. And they're actually coming to raise debt financing from us. And so with that, you are essentially buying a fixed income security structured similar to a bond or a CD. And through that, you're providing the debt financing for these project developers to either go build a new solar project, or they're actually taking out that debt financing on an existing solar project and using the sale of that energy to pay for the interest on those debt notes. And so to make it a little bit simpler, it's a little bit like commercial real estate, where you have a physical asset and a contract there that generates that cash flow. And then like in commercial real estate, you have a tenant. Well, with solar, you sell that power instead, and that's how you make your money. And so through the sale of that power, that's how the renewable energy developer is able to repay you the interest on that debt product that you can buy through Climatize. And so through this, you can invest directly into building clean energy projects in your community.
What kind of projects are we talking about?
Yeah, so we've actually seen a pretty cool array of projects. So the very first project that we built or funded was rather in East Longmeadow, Massachusetts, and it was a community solar project that was benefiting a low-income community nearby. Then we've additionally helped fund a solar project on a Shakespeare theater in New Jersey and also nearby on a synagogue for a congregation. So have seen a really great kind of array of projects, currently doing 2 projects in Tennessee and South Carolina as well. And so through this, we are helping communities really drive local clean energy as well as, earning a potentially competitive return on investment.
Now, when you say competitive return, what are we talking about?
So we're generally seeing anything in the range of 8 to 10% annual interest. And because it's a fixed interest note, while interest rates are high, you can lock in those rates and see these quarterly repayments right back to your account.
So it's kind of like the opposite of when you're right now, no one wants to buy a house because the interest rates are so high. And if you get a fixed income mortgage, then, that's so much more money. Now we've flipped the script. Now I'm the bank. I am the bank now, and I get to say, well, I want
lock that rate in.
I want to lock in that high interest rate.
Exactly. Yeah. So perks of kind of a counter-cyclical financial product here where, while interest rates, just given what the Fed has been doing in terms of kind of trying to slow the economy, well, when you get to flip the script and actually play the bank, well, you as an investor can find these exciting opportunities that, can really drive clean energy, can create local jobs, less pollution, lower power costs, and at the same time, boost the green in your wallet.
This sounds kind of like Kiva loans. Do you remember that, Jesse? Where you'd kind of loan these micro loans to people in the world to help them get established. So, I mean, being able to put as little as $10 down kind of reminds me of that because I think their minimum is like $25. And so basically I get to go on your app or your website, look for things that interest me, like, oh, that looks like a cool project, and then commit some amount of money to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly that. And so you really hit the nail on the head because Kiva was a real inspiration for me. I've been lending through them for about 14 years and have had that same $50 recycled to, people in developing countries. I remember one loan in particular, I was able to help a small business owner get a solar light for his house. It enabled him to stay open longer and his daughter to study at night. And, those are really like feel good, right in your heart opportunities, but they came with no yield. And the thing is, when we look at energy projects, they are actually a really competitive asset class. And so we took kind of some of those similar principles and created Climatize on the back of that inspiration.
When I was a kid, I remember what got me into finance and banking and all this was that I had a passbook savings account. And I remember that I would take my Christmas change or money or whatever, go down with my parents to the bank. The fun part was for me was like seeing the cash machine, coil up all my money, putting it in, having it print out on my passbook and being like, whoa, I'm $20 richer. It seems like this with Climatize would be great for sitting around the dinner table with your family and having your kids take that money from their grandparents or whatever for Christmas or birthdays or whatever and put some of that into this. It's an investing medium, but also it's doing good. It's not just like, oh, I'm putting it in the bank, right? And then because it's an app, you can see your money, like you're just saying, quarterly, you're seeing actual returns on your money.
It's something that we're rolling out here really even in the next couple of weeks is the opportunity to not only do referrals, so bring your friends and family in and they can get a benefit with you, but looking at also some potentially exciting partnerships to enable that kind of gifting of capital as well. Because, this is something where, $100 today can, be a nice little pocket of cash in the future if, you put it away every year and really help investing at an early age. Well, what a better way to, provide, your future generations with a nice gift that also makes a better planet for them to live in the future. It's kind of the same thing with your 401k. You'd hope that the investments through that vehicle are, creating a better world for you to retire in. Same thing with Climatize.
And so you're basically taking people and allowing them to invest in projects that normally you don't get to invest in. I don't talk to that many solar developers. I talk to some, but I have a YouTube channel where I talk to solar developers. But that doesn't necessarily mean that I am usually allowed to invest in that kind of project because, well, A, I don't have all that much money, and most solar developers don't want to talk to me if I want to put in $100 or $200. They want like $100,000 or $200,000 from a potential investor. And the other part is that the government doesn't really like people investing their money in stuff that isn't on some kind of public market. If I want to invest in a startup or something like that, they usually have rules that prevent me from doing that. So how are you able to kind of be this this gateway between the solar developer and me, the person who can lend them that money?
So I think you bring up a really great point, and probably like you hear the echoes of the Wonder Capital conversation that you guys heard previously. That was only accredited investors. And since then, Brian Bershik has been a mentor of mine because he, was passionate about what we're doing. What we have found and what we did is we actually went through all of the financial industry regulatory authority approval process to gain membership there and then ultimately register with the SEC as a funding portal. And what this does is that back when you all had that conversation with Wonder Capital, the SEC had not really rolled out the framework for the Jobs Act, which is now kind of colloquially crowdfunding and being rebranded to community rounds. Now ultimately that is the regulatory framework that we have been able to use to now bring in every investor to this asset class and to these opportunities. And so while crowdfunding is kind of traditionally thought of as investing in startups, really, you can also do it on the debt side. And so we can fractionalize a line of credit to a project and say they need $1 million. Well, all of a sudden you can chop that up into $100,000 $10 debt notes. And if you have a fixed interest, call it 10% on that debt note, well, 10% is the same on 100 as it is 100,000.
So, Will, I bet a bunch of people watching right now are like, how can they make these guaranteed returns here? They're pretty damn good. What is it about solar that allows this to happen?
I think I have to then add the disclosure that, obviously every investment comes with risk and you should do your homework, make sure that the nature of these investments fits your portfolio strategy and that you're aware of the risks with any of the investments because no investment is without its risks. Now, the way that we have been able to find success with these projects is that what we found is that many of these small to mid-market renewable energy developers who have, call it 10 years of experience, they've built 50 projects in a handful of states. They are not the ones who have access to institutional scale capital. The top, 10 developers, maybe of a 500 developer industry, may have a line of credit from some of those capital providers. but the bulk of the market does not. And so for some of these projects, they've built it off of their own balance sheet and have all of their capital locked up in that asset. And so what we've been able to do is essentially come in and find a developer who has this operating project and go and now take out debt financing based on the cash flows that that project is generating. And what that does is that it now allows a developer to go and reinvest into building new projects. Meanwhile, your investment is an asset-backed security, both through the contracted cash flows of the power purchase agreement and then the actual asset value that is the collateral of that lending. And so that's where essentially we have a power yield curve, we have cash flow data, and from there, that's how we appropriately size the debt service coverage ratio. And when we go to do that due diligence on those projects, we're going to be looking at, do they have a quality operations and maintenance contract? Are they using tier 1 suppliers? What utility zone are they in? And do they have, obviously their interconnection permits if they're already generating power at that point, or if they're just before that, what is kind of timeline to interconnection? And from that, we are then making sure that everything is in line before then posting anything to the platform to make sure that, investors have appropriate security and know that there's been quality due diligence on those projects before they come and ever even touch Climatize.
And so I guess my question is then, why? Why are only the 10 top developers getting the credit, lines of credit, and all the rest kind of have to rely on you? If the sun comes up every day, I don't understand. Wouldn't it behoove creditors, the big guys, not me, the little guy who obviously loves solar and wants to support it in every way that I can? Why wouldn't they see the opportunity as well and be giving out these loans?
Yeah, so for them, it really comes down to time and transaction cost. So what we found is utility scale projects, the big mega projects out in the desert, those are pretty well capitalized by Wall Street, large institutional players. And then down at the residential level, you have either the homeowner themselves is paying for the project, or there are kind of specialized lenders, Sunruns, for example, that are really used to doing those micro deals, rolling them all up, and then getting that rolled up portfolio to the institutional player. The mid-market, call it $1 million to $10 million, is really where the institutional players, they just won't get out of bed for a deal that small. And so, there's a handful of specialized lenders in that space, but what we're seeing is such rapid market growth, really stimulated even more so by the Inflation Reduction Act and 10 years of certainty on those credits, whereas previously it was maybe 2-3 years of certainty on credits. Now, through that, there is this rapid growth in particularly community solar. And that's where we have looked to come in with our model to enable these developers to now go and access capital kind of from alternative sources, being you and I, people who really want to see this action, but are not seeing it from the top down. And now we're providing that opportunity to come in and say, hey, look, if you're not satisfied with the level of kind of movement on climate action, you can come in and actually earn a competitive return for, creating this action in your community. And that level of transparency of like, hey, you're putting your money to this project and actually seeing the tangible outcome of it is what we've really heard resonate with our clients. Now, to your question about kind of these small to mid-range projects, it's really surprising that the big lenders aren't coming in. I mean, from a technical perspective as well, you have these projects, they're located closer to the demand centers. You have less losses in the transmission. When you kind of build them at 1 to 10 million, you can actually see some of the economies of scale. And then they really do have kind of more local tangible benefits, like oftentimes using local labor versus importing, electricians and labor for those projects as well. And so aside from, the technical benefits, there's the community benefits. These are really bankable projects that are then backed by the IRA incentives. It's just that, Wall Street doesn't get out of bed for anything less than $50 million.
Now, you mentioned the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, and you mentioned that it's kind of changed the playing field a little bit. Explain more. How did that, without the IRA, would your business be possible at all, or it just would have been more difficult?
So fortunately, the IRA provides greater kind of bankability to a new spectrum of projects. So there was the base 30% investment tax credit. And in particular, community solar, there are some adders that you can get when they benefit a low-income community, when they use domestic American panels, et cetera, where you can stack that up to 70% of the system value. So all of a sudden, wow, you can have a really big backstop on your projects, and there's more money out there to be able to make projects pencil out. Now, our business would have been viable without the Inflation Reduction Act. It's really just adding in additional tailwinds for the sector broadly. Really, Climatize has kind of materialized based on a couple of key changes. Like I mentioned, the Jobs Act that previously didn't enable retail investors to participate in these assets. And then additionally, in 2021, the SEC increased the ceiling for the regulation crowdfunding framework, where now you can raise up to $5 million versus previously you could only do $1 million. And in solar and infrastructure broadly, $1 million doesn't get you very far, but suddenly with 5 million, we found that, wow, we could really go and help capitalize this kind of underbanked segment of the market and go and provide these developers that have 30 years and 300 projects that they've built, but just haven't been able to go and get any lending for a $500,000 project.
What is the scale of Climatize so far? I see on your website it says that you have over $1.5 million invested this year alone. It sounds big for such a small, startup company.
Yeah, so we launched a platform in May. And in May of 2023, it took us a full year to get through all of those regulatory approvals. And then from there, we launched in May and have seen really exciting uptake. So yeah, funded the first $1 million of projects in the first 90 days. And then now, since then, have raised over $1.5 million for the next couple projects. And so have just been really excited to see the turnout and enthusiasm that our customers have been having to really put their money directly to building projects that lead to decarbonization. It's not investing in some carbon credit in some faraway forest or in a startup that you hope succeeds and scales. Like, this is really driving tangible infrastructure projects that are hard assets and really do decarbonize the grid. And to me, that was very important in enabling people to really have that line of sight, A to B impact of their money, and know that when they're deploying it to fighting climate change, it's really having a tangible impact and decarbonizing the grid.
So people out there who might want to put solar on, their Shakespearean theater and they'd like to get some funding, can they reach out to Climatize and have you guys look at their projects? Or are you at the stage where you pretty much know what your next projects are going to be?
So at this point, we've been able to sign 11 letters of intent with project developers and source over $2 billion of projects. But we're always looking for new projects and communities to really support. So, if you have a building in your community that you think would be a really good fit, and there is a local clean energy developer that would be wanting to do that job, then we would be happy to have that conversation because, we see that as a behavior that evolves over time. That, as we're able to prove to the developers that we can, recruit new investors and help capitalize their projects, the network and the marketplace can eventually flip where there is that kind of crowdsourcing of projects and helping really kind of drive that grassroots bottom-up movement so that when you do have a project in your community, that it can be kind of locally championed and then funded all through the marketplace and network.
And so the types of projects that you're mainly focused on, are they all kind of roof-mounted systems, or do you have some that are more, green or even agrivoltaics, like going on, agricultural fields and stuff like that?
Mm-hmm. So to date, all the projects that we have been looking at were roof mount projects. We are looking at some projects that, for example, are receiving grant funding from the USDA. And from that, then they may have that kind of agrovoltaics element. And additionally, looking at some other projects, for example, EV charging infrastructure, something that, you can really go and see the final product of your investment. And I really speak to that based on my experience. I got my foot in the door as a solar installer back in high school to pay my way through college. And as I drive around town, I still feel an enormous amount of pride seeing the projects that I helped put on people's roofs. And actually, we just hired a new growth marketing lead where the second project that we funded was in his hometown. And so he also shares that unique experience and that kind of feeling of what it can mean to, really have it be your project. And that's something that we really look to replicate with our customers as well, that you can go to that building, you could go to that charging station and know that, hey, I invested in this and I helped bring this to life.
It keeps amazing me when I see data from like the IEA that smaller scale solar, which is what you're talking about, down to people's home roofs or these, smaller community roofs, is the fastest growing segment of solar. And I feel like it was never understood by big government types. I think when they did all their projections, they kept thinking, well, it'll be utility scale solar that will do everything. But I don't think we've realized how many roofs there are, right? I mean, there's just space for solar everywhere you look. This used to be a solar installer. What are your thoughts on kind of the next 10 years of this small scale solar?
It's a really great question. I see us moving from a centralized energy world to a distributed energy world. Just to your point, there's a lot of rooftop space that's viable for solar. And now, in certain markets like California, where there has been a lot of solar market penetration, we're going to have to see more storage come online to be able to support, greater solar entry into that market. But if you look at it, okay, we built our energy system as a single coal plant and then, kind of circular rings around that for distribution, whereas now we're building a distributed energy network that is far more resilient than those centralized power plants. And I point to kind of distributed networks like the internet, for example, is a great example of when you have a kind of distributed network and how much more resilient that is. Like, we don't have blackouts on the internet these days. If we did, that would be insane. And yet we still have that in 2023 in a developed country. In California, we have rolling blackouts all the time because of PG&E when it gets windy. And so now as we build a more distributed energy world, there is far greater resilience as we can build in microgrids for that kind of balancing and ability to kind of cordon off regions of the grid. So greater transmission, greater distributed kind of resources can lead to greater resilience. And I think hand in hand with that, it's time to then have distributed finance. We have such a centralized finance world with Wall Street driving those big checks to the utility scale projects. But why would we go to replicate exactly the same model when there are just kind of certain financing models that fit better for a distributed energy world? And so that's why I think crowdfunding and kind of community-driven finance is actually a very, very good fit for these distributed energy resources.
So you were mentioning all these distributed, solar networks where you have more of a microgrid or a neighborhood storage in terms of battery or even municipal level. And that adds a lot more resiliency to the grid because obviously if, the power goes out and the power coming from the big power plant, the line gets cut. Normally it's days and maybe in some cases weeks before the power can be restored to everybody. Whereas with a microgrid system where there's batteries in everyone's houses and then there's larger batteries in certain places and larger solar farms, but within a certain community, that adds a whole bunch of resiliency. Are you going to be working on some more like storage projects and microgrid projects?
Yeah, definitely. So we're looking at a handful of storage projects already coupled with the solar projects on our platform. So going forward, solar is going to be much bigger in the overall equation. And also really hope to see, vehicle to grid charging unlock a new distributed resource that really helps complement solar because so many of us drive to work, plug our car in, and it can serve as a really great storage medium during the day, get people home, and then help really shift the load off those kind of shoulders when everybody comes home, turns their TV on and their AC, and creates that enormous power draw. So definitely looking at solar projects and hope that vehicle to grid also creates a really new distributed resource.
Okay, I feel like if I was watching this interview right about now, I'd be like, okay, I just want to go to the site and check it out, and I think I want to invest, right? When I did this with Wonder Capital, it was cool. I loved it. I'm an accredited investor. I'm used to filling out paperwork. At the time, there's two things I didn't like. One is I had to kind of decide on my investment right there and then. Okay, is it 1,000? Is it 5,000? That's my decision to make. And then I didn't really know where my money went. Like, I knew it went to solar, but I didn't really get to see it or touch it. And so that was kind of a bummer. Here, what I think is cool is I was just kind of farting around on your website and I get to see all the different projects and I know I'm going to be updated and so forth. And so that feels really cool. Also, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't have to commit to anything now. Like I can put in $20 now or $100 now. And then if tomorrow I want to put in more, I can do that. Is that correct?
Exactly that. So for one, you really pick your project. It is, you're putting your money directly to that offering in that solar project. And that's that really level of transparency where you can even see a drone flyover of the project that you're investing in. You can start with as little as $10, and as the raise goes forward, you can put in 100 or 1,000, or it really then is up to you to participate with whatever feels safe and is good for your portfolio allocation strategy.
That's really cool.
Now, I have another question. Let's say that I want to do this investing, but I want it to be retirement. Could I do this as a part of, my Roth IRA or even a self-directed 401k or something like that?
We're working on that. So that's coming up in the future. We have reached out to a number of those providers and are looking at kind of implementations and partnerships to enable that. Today, not quite yet, but we know that when folks are savvy about their investments and want to make sure that they have the best tax strategy in place, that's going to come to mind. So it's something that's on our minds as well, and we're going to be bringing it to you soon.
So you mentioned earlier that fairly soon you'll be able to offer some kind of referrals. Maybe even by the time people are watching this, that'll be in place. So that would be if I wanted to tell Jesse about this, I would somehow get some kind of benefit from it?
Yeah. So it's the idea that, you could tell Jesse and he can use your code, and the two of you both get $10 to make your first investment towards a solar project near you. So rolling it out as soon as possible, hopefully by the time this airs. So we'll look to get you a referral code as soon as possible.
That's awesome.
That's really fun.
Yeah, that kind of gamifies it, makes it really fun to track and, tell your friends about. That's really cool. I love that a lot. Where did you get this idea, by the way? So is this something that you were just, born into knowing all of the ins and outs of finance, or how did you learn about this?
Yeah, so I kind of come from a non-traditional background for finance. I've worked in particle physics labs. Like I mentioned, I was a solar installer. I've really spent most of my career in the clean energy space, project management, and have spent a decade really zeroing in on this industry. But the aha moment for Climatize came, I was doing the first of my 2 master's degrees, and I joined the global climate strikes, where I saw over 100,000 people protesting in the streets for climate action. And I had this vivid memory of standing on a bench and looking out over this sea of people. And there was this incredible hope and motivation. But in that moment, I was also struck by that sad realization that we were all going to go home, and nothing was going to be different the next day. And I just felt like, wow, if you get 100,000 people together and their best option is what? To make a cardboard sign? That's a glaring problem. There needs to be a better way that we bring the public along as active stakeholders. From that was really how we then went through all of the kind of exploration of how do we enable people to really invest in these projects, make it as accessible as possible. And from there, that's when we realized, okay, we got to jump through all the regulatory hurdles to really bring this thing to life. And so set off on that journey, and here we are today having this conversation.
That's really cool. So, I like the way that you're thinking. It's, instead of it being change, bring the change, I want it. You're actually able to kind of put your money where your mouth is, and not only just, kind of put money out there, but you're actually able to get a return
Multiply
on
it. Yeah.
And then, like you're saying, with multiplying it, you could plow that money right back into your next investment.
Right.
And that can just be a nice, hey, I put, X amount of money into solar investments and it's growing.
Yeah, it gives us agency. I guess what I really like is, when you bring it down to the $10 level, it means that even kids can get involved, through their parents, probably, because there's probably an age limit. So many things in life, we don't have agency. We don't feel like our small amounts of money are going to make a difference, but making it feel like that I am a part of this project just makes me feel like I can continue on. I can be part of even a bigger project.
You're really spot on with that. It was why also, we went through all the regulatory work so that this is not a donation, that it's accessible to people where, philanthropy is a luxury and is not something that's readily accessible to everybody. But if we can provide a competitive return on the back of it, well, suddenly it broadens the number of people who can really participate. And that's where, my heart goes out to say, look, we want to be as accessible to anyone. So whether you are the person putting in $10 or $10,000, that it is actually making an impact to that project.
I'm reminded, Jesse, we were going through some files the other day, and we found a savings bond that was in your name from when you were born. One of your aunts gave it to you, and it was like a $30 savings bond. And I remember you asked me this question, right? You're like, how much is it worth?
It was a $50 savings bond. And I go oh my gosh, I wonder what it's worth today. It's worth $50. That's how, just in case you were wondering, that's how bonds work. The ones that you give to your grandkids is you pay less than $50.
Way less.
And then in 20 or 30 years, when they need the money, that's when you get the $50. So
So I'm just
it
saying.
was a little disappointing to be like, oh, this was what it was. But
But I feel like there was generations of people who were kind of propagandized into buying savings bonds, and there's nothing wrong with that. But like this is, I think, a better way if you want your niece or your nephew or somebody to have something for college or whatever. Like this might be a better way to do it.
And it's saying something too.
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
not just I put it into a thing that would give you something that's worth $50.
And Will, let's get to that point. I mean, this is all well and good, but what are we doing for the environment here? Like, how are your projects changing the environment?
I think I had to do the numbers on this the other day, and the 4 projects that we have helped fund through Climatize so far, over their lifetime, they're projected to avoid about 12 million miles driven by the average U.S. gasoline car. And so that's just the first 4 projects. And, that's a meaningful dent. And so, as we look to grow and scale the platform, we will look to 10x and 100x that. And so, it's just the beginning, but really decarbonizing the energy system and the electrical grid unlocks a lot of others, transportation, home heating, et cetera. So if we take these kind of low-hanging fruit and decarbonize electricity first, well, we're really setting the foundation for the later innings of the energy transition.
How can people find out more about Climatize and maybe, start investing?
So you can go to www.climatize.earth and check out our website there. We're currently available on the iOS App Store, and we'll be rolling out Android by January. So we've heard you. It's coming soon. And then from there, you can download the app and get started with as little as $10. And from there, shortly in Q1, we're going to be rolling out a web platform as well. We've also heard that customer feedback. And so, there's a number of ways to find us. You can find me, Will Wiseman, on LinkedIn or will@climatize.earth. And feel free to reach out to me via email if you have either projects seeking funding or are curious about the platform.
Will, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you so much to you and your team for doing this. And I know that as soon as we get off this interview, that's what I'm going to be doing.
Yeah, well, thank you both. I really appreciate the opportunity to share about our work, and it's been exciting to be here.